I used to believe that betrayal had a certain look, a certain feel. Like you'd sense it in the air, catch a whiff of guilt, a flicker of shame in someone's eyes. But the truth? It's much quieter. It's subtle, like a slow leak in a pipe hidden behind the walls, dripping unnoticed until one day the entire ceiling caves in. Emily and I were the couple people envied. You know the type, matching holiday sweaters, anniversary trips posted online, smiles that looked carved from perfection. I thought we were solid, unshakable even. We met in college, built careers side by side, and filled our life with the kind of things that scream success. A house with too many rooms, cars we didn't really need, and dinner parties where we laughed a little too loudly. But the funny thing is, life doesn't unravel in grand moments. It's in the little shifts. The way she stopped laughing at my dumb jokes. How her goodnight kisses became quick, thoughtless pecks. She started going to networking events more often, staying out later, coming home with excuses that were polished and rehearsed. At first, I dismissed it, blamed stress, busy schedules. I mean, who wants to admit their marriage might be crumbling? But it gnawed at me. The way she'd clutch her phone like it held state secrets, or how she suddenly cared more about appearances when she went out with the girls. I told myself not to be paranoid. She was my wife, my best friend. But there was this nagging feeling, a whisper I couldn't ignore. So one night, while she was supposedly at a late client meeting, I found myself staring at her laptop on the kitchen counter. It was unlocked. I didn't plan on snooping. I swear I didn't. But curiosity has teeth, and once it bites, it doesn't let go. I opened her email, expecting nothing, maybe even hoping to find nothing, just to prove myself wrong. But there it was. One email. No subject. Just a simple message that flipped my world upside down. Last night was unforgettable. Same time next week. No name.
No signature.
But the damage was done. My heart didn't race like I thought it would. It was more like a hollow thud, a slow realization settling in my chest. My hands were steady as I closed the laptop, wiped the screen like nothing had happened. I sat in the dark living room, staring at the door, waiting for her to come home. Not because I was ready to confront her, but because I needed to see if she could still look me in the eye. When Emily walked through the door that night, she smelled like expensive perfume, the kind she never wore around me. Her hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and she had that effortless glow, the kind that doesn't come from a late client meeting. "Hey, babe," she said, her voice smooth, dropping her purse by the door like it weighed nothing. She kissed me on the cheek, quick and casual, like she always did. I could still feel the chill of her absence lingering on my skin even after she pulled away. "How was the meeting?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She yawned dramatically, tossing her blazer over the back of the chair. "Exhausting. They just love to drag things out. You know how it is." Yeah. I knew exactly how it was. I nodded, pretending to be absorbed in whatever show was flickering on the TV. But my eyes weren't on the screen. They were on her, watching the little details I'd never noticed before. The way she smiled, too perfectly timed. How she avoided my gaze just a second too long. The faint trace of something, guilt, maybe? Or was it just my imagination? She poured herself a glass of wine and sat across from me, scrolling through her phone, completely at ease. I realized then how easy it was for her to lie. It wasn't hesitation or nervousness that gave people away. It was how natural they made the lie seem. I didn't sleep that night. Not because of rage or heartbreak or whatever they say happens in movies. No, it was something colder than that. A kind of emptiness. Like realizing you've been living in a house made of glass, and someone just threw the first stone. The next morning, she was humming in the kitchen, brewing coffee like nothing was wrong. I studied her from the hallway, wondering how many mornings she'd done this. How many cups of coffee she'd made with hands that had touched someone else the night before. I needed answers, but not from her. I needed proof. So I played my part. The loving, clueless husband. I kissed her goodbye, told her I'd be late because of work, smiled like nothing was breaking beneath the surface. But while she thought I was at the office, I was somewhere else entirely, starting the process of uncovering every dirty little secret she thought she'd buried. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. It was about the game. And I don't lose. I've always believed that people show you who they are when they think no one's watching. Emily had been showing me for months. I just wasn't paying attention. But now I was. That day, I left the house dressed like I was heading to the office, but I didn't go anywhere near it. Instead, I drove to a small electronics store tucked into a strip mall on the edge of town. The kind of place you'd overlook if you weren't looking for it. The guy behind the counter was exactly who I needed. Quiet, no questions, just business. Within 30 minutes, I had what I came for. A set of tiny, discreet cameras and a GPS tracker no bigger than a coin. I wasn't proud of it, but pride wasn't going to get me the truth. When I got home that evening, Emily was already there, laughing on the phone with someone. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just listening to her voice. Warm, effortless. A voice I used to think was meant only for me. She hung up quickly when she saw me. "Hey, you're home early." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Meeting got cancelled." She nodded, not even flinching. No flicker of guilt. Nothing. That night, while she was in the shower, I planted the cameras. One in the living room, another in the bedroom, and the last one in the kitchen, strategically placed to catch every angle. The GPS tracker slipped into the lining of her purse while she was distracted, scrolling through her phone, probably texting him. It was easier than I thought it would be. The next few days felt like waiting for a bomb to go off. I acted normal, kissed her good morning, asked about her day, laughed at her stories. But every moment felt like a performance. She had no idea I was watching. And then it happened. It was a Thursday. I remember because she'd claimed she had a late conference call with a client. I watched from my phone as she paced around the living room, checking her reflection in the mirror, fixing her hair with a little more effort than usual. She wore that red blouse, the one she always said made her feel confident. Then she left. I opened the GPS app and followed the little blinking as it moved across the city. She wasn't heading to any office. No conference call. No late client meeting. She drove across town to a quiet neighborhood, parked her car, and walked up to a house I'd never seen before. She knocked twice. The door opened, and there he was. Not some stranger. Not a coworker. It was someone I knew. Someone who had been in our home. Someone who shook my hand, smiled in my face, and pretended like he wasn't part of the slow knife twisting in my back. I felt nothing.
No ray. No heartbreak.
Just clarity. This wasn't going to end with me being the victim. She thought she was playing a game, but she had no idea who she was playing with. I stared at the screen, my pulse steady, my mind unnervingly clear. There they were, Emily and him, standing in the doorway, sharing a look I hadn't seen from her in months. A look that used to be mine. His name was Eric. A name that meant nothing to most people, but to me, it was like a punch to the ribs. Eric was more than just some guy. He was my friend, or at least that's what I thought. We'd met through work years ago. Dinners with his family, double dates, game nights. He'd sat at my table, toasted at my birthday, even helped me move furniture into the house Emily and I shared. Now he was helping himself to my wife. I watched the footage like it was a documentary about someone else's life, distant and clinical. They didn't waste time, no pretending, no caution. Just comfort, like this was routine for them. They talked, laughed, touched like it was the most natural thing in the world. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. What I felt was something colder, sharper. Focus. Over the next week, I collected evidence. Videos, GPS logs, text messages I pulled from Emily's cloud backup. She'd never been tech-savvy enough to cover her tracks. Their conversations weren't even subtle. They joked about me, my routines, my quirks. Things I'd once thought made me unique in her eyes were now punchlines in private texts. But the worst part wasn't the betrayal. It was the familiarity. They'd been building this behind my back, like termites chewing through the foundation while I smiled. Oblivious. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation would have given her control. Let her twist the narrative, cry, apologize, make excuses. I didn't want excuses. I wanted results. So I planned. Step 1 was simple: gather more dirt. I needed to know everything. Their patterns. Their routines. When they met, where they met, how often. The goal wasn't just to catch them. It was to destroy them. Emily was clever enough to hide the affair. But she wasn't clever enough to hide who she really was. She thought I was blind. She thought I was weak. She thought wrong. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I wasn't interested in serving it cold. I wanted it meticulous. Plated like a 5-star meal with every detail crafted to perfection. I had the evidence. The videos, the messages, the GPS data. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Anyone can catch a cheater. What I wanted was to dismantle everything Emily and Eric thought they had, piece by piece, until there was nothing left but the rubble of their own choices. The first part of my plan was subtle. Control the narrative before they even knew there was one. Emily's life was built on appearances. She thrived on the admiration of her friends, her colleagues, our family. She wasn't just cheating on me. She was living a double life, maintaining the facade of the perfect wife while sneaking around with a man she once pretended to barely tolerate. I started small, quiet moves. I created an anonymous email account and sent screenshots of her texts and photos from the hidden cameras to a few key people in her life, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. Her best friend, her boss, even her mother.
No explanations. No acquiesçations.
Just the facts. Let them wonder. Let them question. Let the walls start closing in without her even realizing why. Next was Eric. I dug into his life with the same precision I'd used on Emily. It wasn't hard. People are careless when they think they're untouchable. I found out he'd been hiding more than just his affair with my wife. Financial secrets. A few unethical decisions at work. A fragile marriage he claimed was basically over, though his wife seemed blissfully unaware of that fact. I made sure she wasn't unaware for long. One night, while Emily thought I was at a work event, I drove to Eric's house. His wife, Lisa, answered the door. Pregnant, glowing, completely oblivious to the storm about to hit her life. "Hi, Lisa," I said calmly, handing her an envelope. "I think you'll want to see this." She opened it right there. Photos of Eric and Emily. Screenshots of their texts. Dates. Times. Locations. Evidence that didn't leave room for doubt. She didn't cry, not at first. She just stood there, flipping through the pages, her face draining of color like the life was being pulled out of her. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. I gave her a small, polite smile. "Because you deserve to know the truth." And that was true. But it wasn't the whole truth. The real reason. Because I wasn't just going to break Emily's heart. I was going to shatter her world. And Eric's too. The next morning felt like any other. Emily made coffee, scrolling through her phone with that same casual indifference she'd perfected over the years. But there was a tension in the air, subtle, like the faint smell of smoke before you realize there's a fire. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, pretending to read the news while stealing glances at her face. Her brow furrowed slightly as she checked her notifications, lips pressing into a thin line. "What's wrong?" I asked, my voice light, like I didn't already know. She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing. Just weird vibes from work this morning." Probably nothing. Not nothing, I thought. The first crack. Throughout the day, the seeds I'd planted began to sprout. I didn't need to be there to watch. I could picture it perfectly. Her best friend, Claire, giving her cold, clipped responses. Her boss, Mark, suddenly distant, his usual friendly emails now terse and professional. By the time I got home, Emily was on edge, pacing the living room, her phone glued to her ear. "Claire, what's going on? You've been weird all day. Did I do something?" A pause. Her face went pale. "What? Who told you that?" She turned away from me, lowering her voice, but I caught fragments. Photos. Lies ridiculous. Who would? She hung up abruptly, her hands trembling just a little. "You okay?" I asked from the doorway, my tone dripping with faux concern. She forced another shaky smile. "Yeah, just work drama. You know how it is." Oh, I knew. I spent the evening pretending not to notice her unraveling. She kept checking her phone, typing furious messages, pacing like she was trying to outwalk her own guilt. But guilt has long legs. It always catches up. By the next day, the cracks had widened. Lisa, Eric's wife, didn't waste time. I'd underestimated her, honestly. She wasn't just angry. She was strategic. She confronted Eric at his office, causing a scene loud enough to attract attention. His coworkers heard every word. "How long have you been sneaking around with her? Do you think I'm stupid?" And by the end of the day, the rumors were wildfire. Emily came home late that night, her face pale and drawn, her usual composure shattered. She walked in, dropped her purse on the floor, and collapsed onto the couch without even greeting me. Rubbing her temples, she muttered, "I think someone's trying to ruin my life." I sat beside her, masking the satisfaction that bubbled under my skin. "Why would someone do that?" I asked softly, my eyes searching hers, daring her to confess. She didn't. Of course not. Instead, she whispered, "I don't know," but she did. And soon, she'd know exactly who was behind it. The thing about watching someone lie to your face, especially someone you thought you knew, is that it becomes almost entertaining, like observing a poorly written play, where the actors forget their lines but still hope the audience doesn't notice. Emily was unraveling faster than I expected. She spent the next few days in a constant state of anxiety, checking her phone obsessively, snapping at me over trivial things, pacing around the house like the walls were closing in. She was right. They were. I kept playing the part of the supportive husband, asking gentle questions, offering comfort when she needed it, acting like her sudden paranoia was just stress from work. But behind the scenes, I was tightening the noose. The next phase of my plan wasn't just to isolate her socially. It was to shake the ground beneath her feet, to make her question everything, especially herself. I started with her job. Emily had worked hard to build her reputation. She thrived on being seen as competent, reliable, the golden employee who could do no wrong. So I made sure she did something wrong. I'd had access to her work laptop for years. Passwords she never bothered to change because, after all, why would she? She trusted me. That was her first mistake. Took me less than an hour to compose a series of emails from her account. Not to random strangers, but to key figures in her company. A passive-aggressive message to her boss, subtly undermining his decisions. A poorly worded reply to an important client, dripping with condescension. Nothing overtly outrageous, just enough to raise eyebrows and plant seeds of doubt. The following week, Emily came home from work looking like she'd been hit by a truck. She dropped her bag at the door and slumped onto the couch, rubbing her temples. "They called me into HR today," she muttered, her voice distant. I looked up from my book, feigning surprise. "HR? What for?" "They think I sent some unprofessional emails. But I didn't. I swear I didn't. It's like..." She stopped, her face tightening with frustration. "It's like someone's trying to set me up." Bingo. I leaned forward, my expression soft with concern. "That's insane. Who would do something like that?" Her eyes darted around the room like the answer might be hidden in the furniture. "I don't know," she whispered, more to herself than to me. "But it feels like I'm losing my mind." Good. That's exactly how I wanted her to feel. But I wasn't done yet. While she struggled to put out the fires at work, I ignited new ones at home. I started moving things around, subtle changes she couldn't quite pin down, misplacing her keys, shifting items in her purse, deleting small, insignificant appointments from her calendar. At first, she brushed it off. "I must be tired." Or, "I probably left them somewhere else." But the human mind can only take so much before it cracks. One night, she broke. I found her sitting on the floor of the bedroom, surrounded by scattered papers and open drawers. Her hands were shaking, her eyes wild with confusion. "I think someone's been in the house," she whispered when she saw me. "Things are missing. Or moved. I don't know. I can't explain it." I knelt beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Emily?" I said softly, my voice like velvet over glass. "Are you sure you're okay?" Her lips trembled. "I don't know." She was slipping, exactly where I wanted her. and I was just getting started. By now, Emily was a shadow of the woman she used to be. The confident, composed person I'd married had been replaced by someone constantly looking over her shoulder, second-guessing her every move. And the best part? She still had no idea I was the one pulling the strings. It was fascinating to watch her crumble under the weight of her own secrets. She thought the affair was the worst thing she'd done. But it wasn't. The real crime was underestimating me. Her work life was in shambles. Suspensions, HR investigations, whispered conversations that stopped the moment she entered the room. Her social life had evaporated overnight. Friends she'd confided in now avoided her calls, replying with polite, distant texts when they bothered to reply at all. At home, she barely slept. She'd wake up in the middle of the night, convinced she'd heard something downstairs. I'd get up, play the dutiful husband, check the locks, reassure her that everything was fine, all while knowing that it wasn't, because I wasn't finished yet. The next step was psychological. I wanted her to feel not just isolated, but hunted. It started with anonymous messages. Just a few here and there. Nothing overtly threatening. Just vague enough to gnaw at the edges of her sanity. You can't hide forever. Does he know yet? I see you. She'd show me the texts, her hands trembling, her eyes wide with fear. Jason, I think someone's stalking me, she whispered one night, clutching her phone like it was the last thing tethering her to reality. I frowned, pretending to be concerned. Do you think it's someone from work? Maybe Eric. The mention of his name made her flinch. I don't know, she murmured. Maybe. I knew exactly who she wanted to blame. But the beauty of my plan was that there was no one to point fingers at. No clear enemy. Just shadows and whispers, designed to make her doubt everything, including herself. I ramped it up, printed photos of her, taken from the hidden cameras I'd installed, started showing up in her purse, her car, even tucked under her pillow. Blurry, off-center shots that looked like they'd been snapped without her knowledge. She broke down the first time she found one under her pillow. I walked into the bedroom to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, the photo clutched in her trembling hands, tears streaming down her face. They're in the house, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jason, someone's been in the house. I sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. I'll take care of it, I promised, my voice calm and steady. I won't let anything happen to you. She sobbed into my chest, clinging to me like I was her only anchor. And in a way I was, because while she was drowning in fear and paranoia, I was the only one holding the rope. And I was in no hurry to pull her out. Emily's descent wasn't dramatic. There were no screaming matches, no shattered glass or slamming doors. It was quieter than that, more insidious, like watching a slow collapse, a building losing its structural integrity one invisible crack at a time until it simply crumbled under its own weight. She stopped going to work, said she couldn't handle the energy there anymore. I nodded sympathetically, even as I forwarded one last batch of carefully crafted emails to her boss, sealing her professional fate. I watched her spiral from the sidelines, the ever-supportive husband, the rock she leaned on while her world disintegrated. She was anxious, paranoid, fragile. The once vibrant, sharp woman I'd married now jumped at shadows, whispered to herself when she thought I wasn't listening, and stared out the window for hours like she was waiting for something, or someone, to appear. She'd become exactly what I wanted. Alone, vulnerable, and terrified. But I wasn't finished. I needed her to feel the weight of her betrayal, not just in the quiet corners of her mind, but out loud, in the stark light of day. So I arranged one final encounter. It was a Saturday. Fitting really, since Saturdays used to be our day. Brunches, lazy afternoons, the kind of domestic bliss people post about online. But this Saturday would be different. I told her I'd planned something special, a surprise to cheer her up. She clung to the idea like it was a life raft, eager for anything that felt normal. She even tried to dress up, though the effort was wasted. Her makeup couldn't mask the dark circles under her eyes, and her smile was brittle, like glass stretched too thin. I drove us to a quiet park, the kind with walking trails and scenic overlooks. She seemed calmer in the open air, her paranoia momentarily soothed by the illusion of safety. But that illusion shattered the moment Eric appeared. I'd made sure of that. He didn't know I'd lured him there, of course. A simple anonymous message had done the trick. Your little secret is about to be exposed. Meet me at Ridgeview Park, 2 p.m. if you care about saving your reputation. Emily froze the moment she saw him, her face draining of color. Jason, she whispered, her voice shaky. What is he doing here? I turned to her, feigning surprise. I was about to ask you the same thing. Eric looked equally confused, his eyes darting between us. He started to speak, but I cut him off. No need for lies, I said, my voice low but sharp. I know everything. Emily's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to form words, but nothing came out. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. One by one, I showed them the photos, their texts, the videos, all the evidence of their betrayal. I watched their faces shift from shock to horror to shame. It was beautiful. Eric tried to speak first. Jason, listen. I held up a hand. Save it. I'm not here to fight. I just wanted you both to know that I know. That's it. I turned to Emily, locking eyes with her one last time. I hope it was worth it. Then I walked away. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need revenge that screamed. I'd already won. Because the thing about betrayal is it's never about the other person. It's about what you have to live with when the dust settles. And for Emily, that dust would never settle. I didn't look back. As I walked away from Emily and Eric, their stunned faces burned into my memory. I felt something I hadn't expected. Nothing. No satisfaction. No victory high. Just a hollow silence where love used to be. Maybe that was the real win. I drove home in complete quiet. No music, no radio. Just the rhythmic hum of the tires on the pavement, matching the steady beat of my heart. Calm. Steady. Controlled. Emily didn't come home that night. Or the next. She didn't call. Didn't text. The woman who had once flooded my phone with "I miss you" messages when I was out late was now a ghost. I imagined her sitting somewhere with Eric, maybe in his cheap apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of what they'd destroyed together. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Her absence gave me time to tie up the final loose ends. I emptied our joint accounts, transferring the money to an account she didn't know existed. The house? Already in the process of being sold, thanks to the paperwork I'd quietly arranged months earlier when my suspicions first started to grow. I left her nothing. No home. No money. No job. No reputation. By the time she finally returned 3 days later, she was unrecognizable. Disheveled, dark circles under her eyes. Her once meticulously styled hair a tangled mess. She stood in the doorway, her gaze sweeping over the half-empty house, realizing what I'd done before she even opened her mouth. Jason, she whispered, her voice brittle like dry leaves. Please, can we talk? I stared at her for a long moment, then simply said, There's nothing left to say. She stepped inside, trembling slightly, her eyes darting around like she was trying to find remnants of the life we'd built. But there was nothing left. Not for her. You can't just erase me, she choked out, her voice rising with desperation. You can't pretend I never existed. I tilted my head slightly, studying her. I don't have to pretend. You did that all by yourself. Her face crumpled, tears spilling down her cheeks. She reached for me, but I stepped back, her touch as unwelcome as her presence. I trusted you, she sobbed. That made me laugh. A cold, hollow sound. You trusted me? Emily, you betrayed me. You lied. You cheated. And now you're standing here acting like you're the victim. She sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, but I felt nothing. No sympathy.
No regret.
Just the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she was finally feeling the emptiness she'd left in me. I picked up my keys, slung my bag over my shoulder, and headed for the door. As I stepped outside, I turned back one last time. You ruined us, Emily, I said softly. I just made sure you'd never forget it. Then I closed the door behind me, leaving her alone in the emptiest place she'd ever been. her own life. Emily didn't get up right away. She stayed on the floor, knees to her chest, shaking. I watched for a moment, detached. The woman who once carried herself with untouchable confidence now looked small, fragile. But I knew better. She wasn't fragile. She was just finally feeling the weight of her own choices. She wiped her face with trembling hands. "Where am I supposed to go?" I shrugged. "Not my problem." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, to beg. But she saw something in my face that stopped her. Finality. I stepped past her, grabbed the last box I needed, and walked out. She had nowhere to run. And that was exactly the point. Days passed. I didn't hear from Emily. No calls.
No texts.
Just silence. I imagined her crashing on someone's couch, if she still had any friends left. Maybe Eric's. But knowing him, that wouldn't last. He was the type to run when things got messy. I checked her social media out of curiosity. Deactivated. Good. She couldn't escape what she'd done. Not online. Not in real life. I went on with my days like she'd never existed. But I knew, wherever she was, she couldn't say the same about me. One evening, weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside were divorce papers. No note.
No apology.
Just her signature. I smiled. Not because it hurt, because it didn't. This was her surrender. But I wasn't done. I signed, scanned a copy, and sent it back. Then I added one more thing. A photo. The one of her, crumpled on the floor. Broken. The perfect ending. After sending the photo, I expected something. A message. A call. Maybe even a desperate knock at my door. But there was nothing. Just silence. And it was perfect. No more lies. No more games. Just the echo of her own mistakes. I didn't need to hear from her. I'd already won. Months passed. Emily became nothing more than a memory. Faded, distant, irrelevant. No more late-night thoughts about what went wrong. No more wondering if I'd missed the signs. I didn't miss them. I just ignored them. But not anymore. Now, I wake up without the weight of betrayal. No bitterness. No regret. Just freedom. She's gone. And I've never felt more alive.